The first time I heard about the road that runs through the heart of America, I was sitting in the back seat of my grandfather's old Chevrolet, somewhere between the cornfields of Illinois and the red dust of Oklahoma. He didn't call it by any official name. He just called it the Mother Road, and he said it with a kind of reverence that made me sit up straight. He told me that this road was not just asphalt and concrete, not just a line on a map, but a living, breathing thing that had carried the dreams and disappointments of a nation across nearly half a continent. He told me that if you listened close, you could still hear the ghosts of the people who had traveled it, the whispers of their hopes and their heartbreaks, carried on the wind that blew through the open windows. I was maybe 10 years old, and I didn't understand all of what he meant, but I understood that this road was something special, something that connected a whole country in a way that no other road ever could. That road, of course, is U.S. Route 66, the famous highway that once stretched from Chicago, Illinois, all the way to Santa Monica, California, covering about 2,400 miles of American soil. It was commissioned in 1926, but its story began long before that, in the dusty wagon tracks of pioneers and the iron rails of the Transcontinental Railroad. The road was an idea long before it was a physical thing, a vision of a nation that wanted to bind itself together, to make the vast and varied landscape of the United States feel smaller, more intimate, more connected. And in many ways it succeeded. For more than half a century, Route 66 was the main artery of American travel and commerce, a ribbon of hope that carried Dust Bowl refugees, war veterans, vacationing families, and restless dreamers from the heartland to the coast. It was the road of opportunity, the road of escape, the road of adventure. And even after it was officially decommissioned in 1985, replaced by modern interstates that bypassed its quaint towns and quirky landmarks, it never really died. It lives on in the memories of those who traveled it, in the songs and movies that celebrated it, and in the roadside attractions and diners that still cling to its faded pavement. The story of Route 66 begins in the early 20th century, when the United States was still a patchwork of dirt roads and local trails. There was no national highway system, no easy way to drive from the Midwest to the West Coast. If you wanted to cross the country, you took the train or you took your chances on a series of poorly maintained roads that might or might not get you where you were going. The idea of a single paved highway that would connect the East and the West was first proposed by a man named Cyrus Avery, a Tulsa businessman who saw the potential for a road that would bring commerce and tourism to the heartland. He pushed for the creation of a federal highway that would run from Chicago to Los Angeles, and in 1926, the U.S. Highway 66 designation was officially assigned. It was not the longest highway in the country, and it was not the first, but it quickly became the most famous, thanks in large part to the efforts of the U.S. Highway 66 Association, which promoted it as the shortest and most scenic route to the West Coast. In the early years, Route 66 was a rough and unpredictable road. Much of it was still gravel or dirt, and in bad weather it turned into a muddy quagmire that could trap cars for hours or even days. But that did not stop the travelers. In the 1930s, during the Great Depression, the road became a lifeline for thousands of families fleeing the Dust Bowl in Oklahoma, Texas, Kansas, and Arkansas. They loaded their belongings into old trucks and cars, strapped mattresses to the roofs, and set out on the long journey to California, where they hoped to find work and a better life. The road was their only hope, their last chance to escape the dust and the poverty that had swallowed their farms and their futures. They traveled in caravans, helping each other when a tire blew or an engine overheated, and they camped by the side of the road, cooking over open fires and sleeping under the stars. The writer John Steinbeck captured their story in his novel The Grapes of Wrath, calling Route 66 the Mother Road, the road of flight, and that name stuck. But the road was not only a path of desperation, it was also a path of opportunity. During World War II, Route 66 was used to transport troops and equipment across the country, and after the war it became a highway of leisure. Veterans returning home with their GI Bill money and a desire to see the country pack their families into station wagons and set out on road trips along Route 66. The road was advertised as the Main Street of America, and for good reason. It passed through small towns and big cities, through deserts and mountains, through farmland and forest, and it offered a glimpse of the American landscape that was both intimate and grand. Every few miles there was a new attraction, a giant dinosaur made of concrete, a trading post selling Indian jewelry, a diner that claimed to have the world's best pie, a motel shaped like a teepee. The road was a carnival of roadside kitsch, a celebration of American ingenuity and eccentricity. And it was a place where strangers became friends, where a traveler could stop for gas and end up staying for dinner, where the people you met on the road became part of your story. The heyday of Route 66 was the 1950s and 60s, when the American love affair with the automobile was at its peak. The road was immortalized in songs, like Nat King Cole's Get Your Kicks on Route 66, and in television shows like Route 66, which followed two adventurers driving a Corvette across the country. The road became a symbol of freedom and independence, of the open road and the endless possibilities that lay beyond the horizon. For many Americans, a trip on Route 66 was a rite of passage, a way to see the country and to discover themselves. It was a road that invited you to slow down, to take the long way, to stop and explore the places that the interstates would later bypass. It was a road that demanded you pay attention, that rewarded the curious and the patient with hidden gems and unexpected encounters. But even as Route 66 reached the peak of its popularity, the seeds of its decline were being sown. The Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956, signed by President Dwight D. Eisenhower, authorized the construction of the interstate highway system, a network of high-speed, divided highways that would connect the country far more efficiently than the old two-lane roads. The interstates were designed to bypass congested areas, to allow drivers to travel long distances without stopping for traffic lights or local traffic. They were fast and safe, but they were also sterile. They did not pass through the heart of every town. They did not offer the same sense of place, the same connection to the landscape and the people. As the interstates were built, Route 66 began to disappear. Sections of it were paved over, widened, or simply abandoned. Towns that had depended on the traffic from the mother road saw their main streets grow quiet, their businesses close, their populations dwindle. The road that had once been the lifeblood of the heartland was slowly strangling, and there was little anyone could do to save it. By the 1970s, the decline was unmistakable. Many of the original alignments of Route 66 had been bypassed or replaced, and the road was no longer the primary route between Chicago and Los Angeles. The final blow came in 1985, when the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials voted to remove the Route 66 designation from the highway system entirely. The road was officially decommissioned, and the green and white Route 66 signs were taken down. The mother road, as an official entity, was gone. But here is the thing about a road that runs through the heart of a nation: it cannot be erased. Even when the signs are gone, the pavement remains and the memories remain, and the people who love that road refuse to let it die. In the years after decommissioning, a grassroots movement emerged to preserve the remaining sections of Route 66, to celebrate its history, and to keep its spirit alive. Local communities, historians, and road enthusiasts formed associations, organized festivals, and lobbied for historic designation. In 1990, the Route 66 Corridor Preservation Program was established, and in 1999, the National Park Service recognized the road as a National Scenic Byway, calling it the Route 66 National Scenic Byway. Today, much of the original road is still drivable, though it is fragmented, interrupted by interstates and modern developments. But for those who seek it, the mother road is still there, waiting, its old motels and diners and gas stations still standing, some restored, some abandoned, all of them relics of a time when the journey was as important as the destination. I went looking for that road myself, a few years after my grandfather told me about it. I was in my 20s then, and I had a beat-up Ford sedan and a week of vacation time. I decided to drive from Chicago to Santa Monica, following as much of the original Route 66 as I could. I had maps and guidebooks, but I also had my grandfather's stories, and I wanted to see if the road he had described still existed. What I found surprised me. The road was not what it had been, but it was not gone either. I drove through the quiet streets of small towns in Illinois and Missouri, past old service stations with faded Sinclair dinosaur logos, past diners where the coffee was still a quarter and the waitress called you honey. I crossed the Mississippi River into Missouri, and then into Kansas, where the road runs for only about 13 miles, a strange little snippet of the mother road that feels like a secret. I drove through the Oklahoma Panhandle, through the Texas Panhandle, through New Mexico and Arizona, and finally into California, through the Mojave Desert and over the San Bernardino Mountains, until I reached the pier in Santa Monica, where the road officially ends, marked by a sign that says Santa Monica Pier. End of the trail, but the trail does not really end. The road continues in the hearts of the people who travel it, in the stories they tell, in the photographs they take, in the roadside attractions that still welcome travelers with open arms. There is the blue whale of Catoosa, Oklahoma, a giant concrete whale that sits in a pond, built by a man who wanted to give his wife a unique anniversary gift. There is the Cadillac Ranch in Amarillo, Texas, where 10 Cadillacs are buried nose first in the ground, their tail fins pointing to the sky, a living monument to the wild creativity of the road. There is the Wigwam Motel in Hallbrook, Arizona, where you can sleep in a concrete teepee. There is the Roy's Motel and Cafe in Amboy, California, a ghost town gas station that still beckons to travelers with its neon sign. These places are not just tourist traps. They are the soul of the Mother Road, the physical manifestation of the American spirit of adventure and resilience. They are reminders that the journey is the point, that the road itself is the destination. And that is what I want to talk about in this series. Not just the history of Route 66, but the stories that have unfolded along its path. The stories of the people who built it, who traveled it, who fought to save it. The stories of the families who found a new life in California, of the soldiers who came home from war and hit the road, of the artists and writers and musicians who were inspired by its endless horizon. The stories of the small towns that have held on and those that have faded away. The stories of the road itself, that ribbon of concrete and dreams that runs through the heart of America. My grandfather would have been 91 this year. He never got to see the road the way I saw it, never got to drive the full length of it again after the interstates took over. But he left me with the stories, and those stories are what I want to share. So come along. Let's get in the car, roll down the windows, and take a journey along the Mother Road. Let's explore the towns and the landscapes, the diners and the motels, the people and the ghosts. Let's find out why this road, even after all these years, still runs through the heart of America. Because the road is not just a highway. It is a living thing, and it still has stories to tell. So I set out on that Tuesday morning in late spring, the sky a perfect blue, the air smelling of exhaust and possibility. I had a full tank of gas, a cooler of sandwiches, and a stack of maps that my grandfather had annotated with his own handwriting, little notes in the margins that said things like, "Good pie here," or "Don't miss the bridge," or "This stretch is lonely, but beautiful." I followed his notes out of Chicago, past the old neighborhoods where the road originally began, past the brick buildings and the elevated train tracks, until the city gave way to suburbs and then to farmland, the landscape flattening out into the endless fields of Illinois. The first 100 miles were easy, the road straight and true, but I soon learned that following the old alignments was not like driving an interstate. The signs were small, sometimes missing, and I had to rely on my maps and my instincts. I missed a turn near the town of Pontiac and ended up on a gravel road that dead-ended at a cornfield. I sat there for a moment, the engine idling, and I laughed. My grandfather would have done the same thing, I thought. He always said that getting lost was part of the adventure. I found my way back to the main road and stopped for lunch in the town of Dwight, Illinois, at a place called the Polka Dot Drive-In, a classic diner with a black and white checkerboard floor and a neon sign that still flickered after all these years. The waitress was a woman named Louise, who had been working there since the 1950s. She told me that when Route 66 was still busy, the drive-in would be packed from morning until night, cars lined up for blocks, families eating burgers and shakes in their cars, the jukebox playing Elvis and Chuck Berry. She remembered the travelers who came through, the soldiers heading west, the families heading to California, the hitchhikers who would hop out of cars and ask for a cup of coffee. She said that the road had a rhythm, a pulse, and that you could feel it in the air. When the interstates came, that rhythm disappeared. The cars stopped coming and the drive-in nearly closed, but the town held on, and so did she. She served me a slice of pie that was as good as my grandfather's notes promised. From Illinois, I crossed into Missouri, the road following the path of the old stagecoach routes, winding through the Ozarks, past limestone bluffs and deep green valleys. Missouri is where the road begins to feel like a different country. The landscape gets rougher, the town's smaller, the stories older. I stopped at the Merrimack River, where a bridge that was built in the 1920s still stands, its steel beams rusted but solid. I got out of the car and walked to the middle of the bridge, looking down at the water sliding over the rocks, and I thought about all the people who had crossed that bridge before me. Farmers and salesmen, families and runaways, dreamers and drifters. The road had carried them all, and the bridge had held them up. I touched the railing, felt the cold metal, and I wondered if the road remembered them the way I remembered my grandfather. Kansas came next, and it was a surprise. Most people think of Kansas as flat, endless plains, but the short stretch of Route 66 here, just 13 miles, passes through a corner of the state that is green and rolling, with old barns and stone churches and a quiet that feels like a held breath. There is a town called Galena, which was once a mining town and then a gas station stop, and now it has the restored Canotech service station, where the pumps are painted red and the windows are full of memorabilia. I met a man there named Jack who had lived in Galena his whole life. He told me that when the road was alive, you could hear the trucks and cars from his bedroom window all night long. Now the road is a quiet drive, and he says he misses the noise. He says that silence can be heavier than sound. Oklahoma is where the road starts to feel like something else entirely. The land opens up, the sky widens, and the sun beats down on the red dirt and the rusting windmills. I drove through the town of Catoosa, and I saw the blue whale, that giant concrete creature rising out of a pond, its mouth open as if to swallow the whole sky. It was built by a man named Hugh Davis in the early 1970s as an anniversary gift for his wife, who loved whales. They used to swim in the pond together, and the whale became a roadside attraction, a place for families to stop and picnic and take pictures. Today it is faded and cracked, but it is still there, and children still climb on it, and parents still snap photos. It is a monument to love and whimsy, and it belongs to the road. I kept going through the western part of Oklahoma, past the town of Clinton, where the Oklahoma Route 66 Museum tells the story of the Dust Bowl and the migration, past the old gas stations that have been turned into antique shops, past the fields of wheat and the cattle ranches. The road here is straight and long, and I found myself driving faster than I should, the hum of the tires lulling me into a kind of trance. I had to remind myself to slow down, to notice the things that were passing by. A faded sign for a motel that had been closed for decades. A barn with a painted advertisement for a brand of chewing tobacco. A windmill turning slowly in the breeze. These are the details that make the road real, that tell the story of the people who lived and worked along this stretch. I crossed into Texas near the town of Shamrock, and the landscape changed again. The panhandle of Texas is a vast, flat expanse of ranchland and oil fields, where the wind never stops blowing, and the sunsets are so wide they seem to fill the whole world. I drove through the town of McLean, where the old Phillips 66 service station has been restored, its neon sign glowing red and green against the fading light. I stopped for the night in Amarillo, and the next morning I went to see the Cadillac Ranch. It is exactly what you have heard, 10 Cadillacs from the late 1940s to the early 1960s, buried nose first in a field, their tail fins rising like strange flowers. I walked among them, and I saw that they had been painted and repainted by visitors, layer upon layer of graffiti, names and dates and messages, all of them blending together into a chaotic art piece. I picked up a can of spray paint that someone had left behind, and I added my own mark to the car at the end of the line. It felt like a ritual, a way of joining the long line of travelers who had passed this way. From Texas, I went into New Mexico, and the road climbed into the high desert, past the ruins of old pueblos and the lights of Albuquerque, past the ghost town of Santa Rosa and the blue lakes that dot the landscape. New Mexico is a place where time moves differently, where the road seems to stretch into infinity, where the mesas and arroyos hold the stories of ancient peoples and modern wanderers. I stopped at the Route 66 Auto Museum in Santa Rosa, a cluttered building filled with classic cars and abandoned dreams. The owner, an old man named Roy, told me about the years he spent driving the road, how he would pick up hitchhikers and listen to their stories. He said that everyone who traveled Route 66 was searching for something, even if they did not know what it was. The road was a mirror, and it reflected back whatever you brought with you. I crossed into Arizona, and the desert became more severe, the colors shifting from red to ochre to a pale, dusty gold. I drove through the Petrified Forest National Park, where the road cuts through a landscape of stone logs and painted desert, and then into the town of Hallbrook, where the Wigwam Motel stands with its concrete teepees, each one a room for the night. I rented one of those teepees, and I slept under a blanket that smelled of dust and pine, and I dreamed of the people who had stayed there before me, families on vacation, truck drivers, couples on the run. Arizona is also where the road intersects with the Grand Canyon, but I did not go there. I stayed on Route 66, through Flagstaff and down into the Verde Valley, past the old mining town of Jerome, which clings to a hillside like a forgotten dream. And then I climbed into the mountains, winding through the Sitgreaves National Forest, until I reached the Arizona-California border. The last stretch was through the Mojave Desert, a landscape of Joshua trees and dry lake beds, of abandoned gas stations and empty motels, of loneliness and beauty. I drove through the town of Needles, where the heat is so intense that the asphalt seems to shimmer, and then into California, where the road runs through the ghost town of Amboy, past Roy's Motel and Cafe, that iconic neon sign still blazing in the middle of nowhere. I stopped at Roy's and walked around the property. The motel rooms were empty, the windows broken, the pool drained. But the cafe was still open, run by a woman named Betty who had moved there from Los Angeles 20 years ago. She said she came to Amboy looking for quiet, and she found it. She serves coffee and hamburgers to the few travelers who still come through, and she tells them the stories of the road. She told me that she had met people from all over the world, Japan, Germany, Australia, all of them searching for the Mother Road. She said that Route 66 is not just an American road, it is a global idea. It is the road that everyone wants to drive, because it represents the possibility of leaving everything behind and starting over. I drove the final miles over the San Bernardino Mountains, through the Cajon Pass, and down into the Los Angeles Basin, the smog settling over the city like a blanket. I reached Santa Monica in the late afternoon, the sun low over the Pacific, the pier crowded with tourists and street performers. I found the end of the trail sign and I stood there, looking at the ocean, feeling the cool breeze off the water. I had driven nearly 2,400 miles. I had seen the heart of America, the small towns and the wide-open spaces, the old motels and the diners where the coffee was still $1 and the stories came for free. And I understood, finally, what my grandfather had been trying to tell me all those years ago. It was not about the road itself. It was about the journey, the people, the moments that you carry with you long after the asphalt has crumbled and the signs have been taken down. It was about the way a road can become a living thing, a thread that connects past and present, a ribbon of memory that runs through the heart of a nation. I stood there for a long time, the ocean spread out before me like a living map of blues and grays. The pier was crowded with families and couples, children chasing pigeons, teenagers skateboarding, old men fishing off the railing. I watched a pelican glide low over the water, its wings barely moving, and I thought about how far I had come, 2,400 miles, more or less. It did not feel like an ending. It felt like a pause, a breath before the next chapter. I walked down to the beach, the sand soft and cool under my shoes. I took them off and let the water wash over my feet, the Pacific cold and clean. I thought about my grandfather, about the way he used to describe the ocean when he came to California in the 50s. He said he had never seen so much water in his life, that it seemed like the whole world was made of it. He stood on this same beach, maybe on this same stretch of sand, and he looked out at the horizon and understood that he had reached the end of something. Not the end of the road, but the end of a certain kind of searching. He stayed in California for a few years, working in a factory in San Bernardino, then he went back to Oklahoma. He never really explained why. He just said that the road called him home. I turned away from the water and walked back toward the pier. There was a small diner at the edge of the boardwalk, a place called the End of the Trail Cafe. It looked like it had been there for decades, with peeling paint and a neon sign that flickered in the afternoon light. I went inside and sat at the counter. The waitress was an older woman with gray hair and the kind of tired smile that comes from years of serving coffee to strangers. She set a cup in front of me without asking, and I took a sip. It was strong and black, just the way I liked it. "You drove all the way from Chicago," she said. It was not a question. She had seen the road in my eyes, the dust and the sun and the miles. "How did you know?" I asked. "Because you have that look," she said, "the look of someone who has been on the road too long. You are not here to stay. You are here to catch your breath." She told me her name was Maggie and she had worked at that diner for 30 years. She had seen thousands of travelers come through, most of them on Route 66, all of them with a story. She said that the road was a kind of religion for some people. They came to the end of the trail expecting some kind of revelation, some answer to the questions they had been carrying across the country. But the ocean does not answer questions. It just keeps moving in and out, in and out. And eventually they realized that the answer was not at the end of the road. It was in the road itself. I nodded because I understood what she meant. I had spent weeks driving across the country and I had not found any grand truth, but I had found something else. I had found the feeling of a family farm in Illinois, the last patch of sweet corn before the fields went fallow. I had found the quiet hum of a diner in St. Louis, where the waitress called everyone honey and the pie was always a day old. I had found the vastness of the Oklahoma sky, the way it seemed to press down on the land, and the stubbornness of the people who still lived there. I had found the Cadillac Ranch, covered in 1,000 layers of paint, each layer a story. And I had found Roy's Cafe in Amboy, run by a woman who had left behind the noise of Los Angeles for the silence of the desert. I finished my coffee and paid the bill. Maggie waved me off when I tried to leave a tip. "You keep that," she said. "You might need it on the road back." I had not thought about the road back. I had been so focused on getting to the end that I had not considered what came after. The journey had become its own destination. But now I was at the ocean, and the road stretched behind me like a long ribbon, and I knew that I could not just stop. I had to go back, or I had to go somewhere else. I was not sure yet. I walked out of the diner and stood on the pier, watching the sun begin its slow fall toward the horizon. The sky turned orange and pink, and the water turned gold, and I felt a strange sadness settle into my bones. It was the sadness of finishing a long book, of closing the cover and knowing that the characters would go on living without you. The people I had met along the road, the diners and the motels, the gas stations and the museums, they were all still there, still existing in their own time. But I was leaving them behind, moving forward into the next moment. I thought about the town of Galena, Kansas, and the old Marathon gas station, and the man named Jack who had sold me a bottle of water and told me about his son. I thought about the blue whale in Catoosa, and the way the children were laughing as they climbed on its back. I thought about the Cadillac Ranch, and how strange it was that so much art and so much history had come from a row of buried cars. I thought about the Wigwam Motel in Hallbrook, and the way the night sky had been so full of stars that I felt like I was falling into it. I turned and walked back to my car. It was parked in a lot near the pier, covered in a thin layer of dust from the desert. I opened the door and sat in the driver's seat, but I did not start the engine. I just sat there looking at the ocean through the windshield, and I thought about what my grandfather had said about the road being a living thing. I understood it now. The road breathes. It changes with every traveler, every car, every footstep. It grows old and it decays, but it never dies. It just becomes something else. I started the car and pulled out of the lot. I did not know where I was going. Maybe east, back along the road I had just traveled. Maybe north, toward the coast. Maybe just around the block to see what I could find. It did not matter. The road was still there, waiting, and I was still on it. I drove through the streets of Santa Monica, past the palm trees and the beach houses, past the shops and the restaurants, past the people living their ordinary lives. I felt like a ghost, invisible and untouchable, passing through a world that did not need me. But that was okay. I was not there to be needed. I was there to see, to witness, to carry the stories with me. I found my way to the freeway, the 405 North, and I let the traffic carry me along. The sun was setting and the headlights of the cars stretched out in front of me like a string of pearls. I drove for an hour, 2 hours, not paying attention to the exits, just moving. The city gave way to suburbs, and the suburbs gave way to hills, and then the hills opened up into the mountains. I was heading toward the desert again, back toward the road I had come from. The thought made me smile. I was going back, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I wanted to see the motels and the diners again, to talk to the people I had met, to let the road sink into my bones one more time. I wanted to stand at the Blue Whale and watch the children play, to sit in Roy's cafe and listen to Betty tell her stories, to drive through the dust of Oklahoma and the heat of Texas and the silence of New Mexico. I wanted to be on the road again because the road was where I felt most alive. I pulled off the freeway at a rest stop near the Cajon Pass. The air was cool and dry, and the sky was clear, filled with stars that seemed close enough to touch. I got out of the car and walked to the edge of the parking lot, where a railing looked out over the valley. The lights of the towns below twinkled like scattered diamonds, and the wind whispered through the Joshua trees. I stood there for a long time, breathing in the desert air, feeling the weight of the miles behind me and the miles ahead. I thought about the people who had traveled this road before me, the ones who had built it and the ones who had walked it. The Native Americans who had followed the ancient trails, the pioneers who had crossed the plains in wagon trains, the Dust Bowl refugees who had fled the dust and the drought, the soldiers who had come home from war and headed west to find a new life. They were all part of the road now, their stories woven into the asphalt and the concrete, into the faded signs and the empty buildings. And I was a part of it too, just another traveler passing through, leaving my own small mark. I got back in the car and turned onto the old road, the original Route 66, which ran parallel to the freeway in places. The asphalt was cracked and uneven, and the lines were barely visible, but it was still there. I drove slowly, my headlights cutting through the darkness, illuminating the sides of the road. I saw a faded sign for a motel that had been closed for decades, its windows boarded up, its neon sign hanging crooked. I saw an old gas station, its pumps long gone but the building still standing, a ghost of a place where travelers had once stopped to fill their tanks and stretch their legs. I drove through the town of Victorville, which was quiet and dark, most of the stores closed for the night. I passed a diner with a neon sign that said "Eat" in bright red letters, and I thought about stopping, but I was not hungry. I just wanted to keep moving, to feel the road under my wheels, to let the miles pass like pages in a book. I crossed into Barstow, and the road widened into a strip of fast food restaurants and gas stations, the lights harsh and bright. I kept going, past the town, into the open desert again. The road stretched out ahead of me, empty and straight, and I pressed down on the accelerator, the speedometer climbing. The wind howled through the open window, and the stars spun overhead, and for a moment I felt like I was flying. I reached Needles in the early morning, the sun just beginning to rise over the Colorado River. The heat was already building, the air thick and dry. I stopped at a gas station and filled up the tank, and I bought a cup of coffee and a slice of leftover pie. The man behind the counter was old and bald, with a gold tooth and a tattoo of a snake on his arm. He asked me where I was heading, and I told him I was going back east. Going back, he said, that is unusual. Most people come this way and never look back. I shrugged. I am not most people, I said. He laughed, a dry, rasping sound. No, I guess you are not. Well, good luck to you. The road is full of surprises. I finished my coffee and got back in the car. I crossed the bridge over the Colorado River into Arizona, and the landscape opened up again, the red rocks and the mesas rising out of the desert floor. I drove through the town of Oatman, where wild burros roam the streets and the old storefronts look like they have not changed in 100 years. I stopped and bought a bag of carrots from a vending machine, and I fed them to the burros, their soft noses nuzzling my hand. A woman watching me told me that the burros were descendants of the pack animals used by the miners in the late 1800s. They had been set free when the mines closed, and they had thrived in the desert. They were survivors like the road itself. I drove on through the Black Mountains, the road twisting and turning, the views opening up at every curve. I saw a sign for the ghost town of Chloride, and I took the detour, driving down a dirt road for several miles until I reached the old mining camp. It was almost completely abandoned, just a few buildings and a church, the paint peeling, the windows broken. I walked around, listening to the silence, the only sound the wind and the crunch of my boots on the gravel. I found a graveyard on the edge of town, the headstones weathered and leaning, the names barely legible. I read them anyway: Edward, Mary, James, Elizabeth, all of them born in the 1800s, all of them buried here in the desert. They had come for the silver and they had stayed, and now they were part of the land. I left Chloride and continued east, through Kingman and into the Hualapai Valley. I passed the town of Hackberry, where the old general store had been turned into a Route 66 museum, its walls covered in road signs and license plates from every state. I stopped and talked to the owner, a woman in her 60s named Carol, who had moved there from Ohio 20 years ago. She said she had come to the road on a whim, and she had never left. She loved the tourists, loved listening to their stories, loved the way the road connected people from all over the world. She told me about a couple she had met from Japan who had come all the way across the Pacific just to drive from Chicago to Santa Monica. They had saved up for years for the trip. They said it was a dream of a lifetime. And she had been part of that dream just by being there, by having a coffee and a friendly smile. I bought a postcard from her, a photograph of the Hackberry store from the 1950s, and I wrote a note to my grandfather. I told him that I understood now that the road was not just a highway. It was a testament to the human spirit, a ribbon of hope and memory and resilience. I mailed it from the post office in Kingman, and I watched the envelope disappear into the slot, and I felt a sense of peace. The road continued on, through the old mining towns of the Arizona Strip, past the painted desert and the petrified forest, past the wigwams of Holbrook, past the ruins of the pueblos near Grants. I drove through the night, the headlights illuminating the road ahead, the stars wheeling overhead. I stopped at a rest area in New Mexico and slept for a few hours in the back seat, curled up on my sleeping bag. When I woke, the sun was rising over the plains, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. I made a cup of coffee on a portable stove, and I sat on the hood of my car, watching the world wake up. A trucker pulled into the rest area, a big rig with a trailer full of something. He got out and stretched, and he saw me sitting there, and he walked over. He was a big man with a gray beard and a cap that said Route 66. He asked me if I was all right, and I said I was fine. He nodded, and he said that he had been driving the road for 30 years, that he knew every curve and every town. He said that the road had changed, but it was still the same. It was still the road of dreams. I asked him where he was headed, and he said he was going to Oklahoma City to deliver a load of auto parts. His name was Mike, and he had a wife and 3 kids back in Oklahoma. He said that the road was his office and his home and his church all rolled into one. He said that when you spend that much time on the road, you start to feel like it is a part of you. And it is. It gets into your blood and you cannot get it out. He asked me where I was going, and I told him I was not sure. He laughed and said that was the best answer. He said that the road does not care where you are going. It just takes you there. We stood there for a while, watching the sunrise, not saying anything. Then he climbed back into his truck, and he honked his horn as he pulled away, the sound echoing across the flat land. I packed up my gear and got back on the road. I drove through the morning, through the town of Santa Rosa where the blue lake shimmered in the sun. I passed the old auto museum, and I thought about the old man Roy, who had told me that everyone who traveled Route 66 was searching for something. I thought about what I was searching for, and I realized that I had found it. Or maybe I had not found it, but I had stopped searching. The road itself was the search, and the answer was the journey. I crossed the border back into Texas, the landscape flattening out, the wind picking up. I drove through Amarillo, past the Cadillac Ranch, and I saw that someone had painted the cars again, a fresh coat of rainbow colors. I did not stop. I just drove, the road a long black ribbon stretching out before me, the sky wide and blue, the sun high and hot. I reached the town of Shamrock at sunset, the sky on fire, the old Phillips 66 station glowing in the dying light. I parked my car and walked around the town square, past the old courthouse, past the church, past the houses with their porch lights just beginning to flicker on. I found a small diner, the U-Drop Inn, and I went inside. The waitress was young, maybe 20 years old, with a braid and a gap-toothed smile. She brought me a menu and a glass of water, and she asked me where I was from. I told her I was from Chicago, but I was not sure anymore. I had been on the road for so long that I had lost track of where I belonged. She nodded, and she said she understood. She had grown up in Shamrock, and she had never left. She said that sometimes she thought about leaving, about driving the road west to see what was out there, but she was afraid to leave the familiar. She said that the road can take you anywhere, but it can also take you away from everything you know. I ordered a burger and a piece of pie, and I ate slowly, watching the sun go down through the window. The sky turned from orange to purple to black, and the stars came out, one by one. I paid the bill, and I left a generous tip, and I walked out into the night. I stood in the middle of the street, the road empty and quiet. I looked east toward the darkness, and I looked west toward the lights of the town. The road went both ways, and I could choose either direction. But I knew deep down that I was not done yet. There was more to see, more to learn, more to feel. The road was not a line between 2 points. It was a circle, a loop that kept coming back to itself. I got in my car, and I turned the key, and I started driving. I did not know where I was going, and that was all right. The road would tell me. It always did. I drove east into the night, the headlights cutting a narrow path through the darkness of the Texas Panhandle. The road was empty, and I let my mind wander, replaying the conversations and the landscapes I had seen. The stars were bright overhead, and the wind was cool coming through the cracked window. I thought about Carol in Hackberry, about Mike the trucker, about the young waitress in Shamrock. They were all part of the same story, a story that stretched from the Great Lakes to the Pacific Ocean. And I was part of it too. A few hours later, I crossed the border into Oklahoma, the welcome sign lit up with the words Native America. The road here was different, the land flatter and the sky even bigger. I drove through the town of Elk City, where the old Route 66 motels stood abandoned, their neon signs dead or flickering. I pulled over at one of them, a place called the Trade Winds, and I got out to stretch my legs. The building was boarded up, the windows smashed, but I could see the ghost of its former life in the shape of the parking lot and the faded lettering on the wall. I imagined travelers from the 50s pulling up in their DeSotos and their Hudsons, families on vacation, soldiers coming home from the war. They had all passed through here, and now the motel was just a shell, a memory. I sat on the curb for a while, and a man came out of a small house across the street. He was old, with a gnarled walking stick and a hat that shaded his eyes. He asked me if I was lost, and I said no, just resting. He introduced himself as Joseph, and he said he had lived in Elk City his whole life. He remembered when the motel was open, when the road was busy, when you could hear the rumble of cars all night long. He said that when the interstate came, everything changed. The road fell silent and the businesses dried up, but he stayed. He said that the road was his history and he could not leave it. I asked him if he missed the old days. He smiled and said that he missed the people. He missed the stories. He said that every traveler who stopped had a story, and he had listened to thousands of them. He told me about a woman who had driven from New York to California in a beat-up Chevy, looking for her son who had run away. She had found him in a diner in Amarillo, and they had gone home together. He told me about a man who had lost his wife and then drove Route 66 for a year, stopping at every town to leave a flower on a bench in her memory. Joseph said that the road was a place where people came to heal or to find something they had lost, and sometimes they found it. We talked until the sky began to lighten, and then he invited me inside for coffee. His house was small and cluttered, filled with photographs and trinkets from the road. He had a collection of license plates from every state, and he showed me the one from Alaska, a state he had never visited but always dreamed of. He said that the road had taught him to dream, even if he never left home. I thanked him for the coffee, and I gave him a postcard from the Grand Canyon, one I had bought at the South Rim. He looked at it and smiled, and he said that he had never seen the canyon, but he could imagine it. He said that was enough. I drove on through the morning, past the town of Clinton, past the Route 66 Museum, and into the heart of Oklahoma City. I took the old alignment, the one that cuts through the city on Classen Boulevard, past the round barn of Arcadia and the towering oil rigs. I stopped at a diner called the Hilo, a tiny place with a counter and a few tables. A woman named Della was running the show, a big woman with a loud laugh and a pot of coffee always in her hand. She told me that her grandmother had opened the diner in 1934, and she had been working there since she was 12. She said that the road had changed, but the diner had not. The same recipes, the same seats, the same stories. I ordered a stack of pancakes and a side of bacon, and while I ate, Della told me about the regulars. There was a man named Red, a retired trucker who came in every morning for a cup of black coffee. There was a young couple, Jenny and Paul, who had moved to Oklahoma from California and were trying to make a go of it. They came in for lunch twice a week. Della said that she knew everyone's story and she kept them safe. The diner was a sanctuary, a place where the road paused and people could breathe. I finished my meal and paid, and Della gave me a piece of pie to go, saying that I looked like I needed it. I thanked her and stepped outside. The sun was high and the heat was building. I got back in my car and continued east, through the rolling hills of the Ozark Mountains into Missouri. The road here was winding and green, the trees thick on either side. I passed through the town of Lebanon, where the old Munger Moss Motel still stood, its neon sign a beacon of the past. I did not stop. I kept driving, the road pulling me forward. Crossing the Mississippi River into Illinois, I felt a shift. The landscape opened up into farmland, endless fields of corn and soybeans stretching to the horizon. I drove through the town of Litchfield, where the old Ariston Cafe had been serving travelers since 1924. I stopped there for lunch, sitting in a booth under the pressed tin ceiling. The waitress was a teenager named Emma, who told me she was saving up for college. She asked me about my trip, and I told her about the boroughs and the ghost towns and the people I had met. She listened with wide eyes, and she said that she hoped one day she could take a trip like that. I told her she would. The road would wait for her. I drove on through the towns of Havana and Mason, along the old alignments that wound through the Illinois cornfields. I passed the ruins of the Chain of Rocks Bridge, its steel arch spanning the Mississippi. I did not cross. I stayed on the Illinois side, heading north now toward Chicago. The road was becoming familiar, the names of towns I had known since childhood: Joliet, Wilmington, Dwight. I pulled into Dwight at sunset, the old First Church of Christ Scientist building glowing golden in the fading light. I walked up and down Main Street, past the antique shops and the small cafes. I found a bench in front of the old depot, and I sat down. A man came and sat next to me, an older gentleman with a white beard and a worn-out Route 66 cap. He introduced himself as Frank. He said he had been a historian of the road for 40 years, and he had written books about its history. I asked him what he thought the road meant in the end. He thought for a long time, and then he said that the road was a mirror. It reflected the dreams and the struggles of the people who traveled it. It was a testament to the human need to move, to explore, to connect. But it was also a reminder that the journey is never about the destination. It is about the moments in between. He told me that he had spent years trying to understand why the road had such a hold on people. He had interviewed hundreds of travelers from all over the world. They all had different reasons for being on the road, but they all shared the same feeling. They felt alive on the road. They felt free. And that freedom, Frank said, was the heart of America. It was the promise that you could start over, that you could reinvent yourself, that the horizon was always there, waiting. We sat in silence as the stars came out. Then he stood up and shook my hand. He told me to keep driving, to keep listening, to keep the road in my heart. I thanked him, and I watched him walk away, his figure disappearing into the twilight. I got back in my car, and I drove the last stretch into Chicago, the skyline rising in the distance. I crossed the city limits and took the old alignment, through the neighborhoods of Berwyn and Cicero, past the old diners and the bungalows. I followed the road as it merged into Ogden Avenue, then onto Jackson Boulevard, and finally into the heart of downtown. I pulled over near the corner of Michigan Avenue and Adams Street, where the official start of Route 66 is marked by a small sign. I got out and stood there, the traffic rushing past me, the buildings towering above. I had come full circle. The road that had taken me away had brought me back. I thought about my grandfather, about the stories he had told me, about the journey he had never taken. I thought about all the people I had met, the Burrows in Oatman, Carol in Hackberry, Mike the trucker, Joseph in Elk City, Della in Oklahoma City, Emma in Litchfield, Frank in Dwight. They were all part of the road, and the road was part of me. I looked at the sign and I touched it. The metal was cold and worn. I turned and looked west toward the setting sun. The road stretched out from there, all the way to the Pacific. I knew I could get back in my car and drive it again, and it would be different every time. The road never stays the same because the people on it never stay the same. I smiled and I walked to the edge of the sidewalk. I had no more miles to go. The journey was over and it would never end. The road that runs through the heart of America runs through the heart of everyone who drives it. It is a road of memory, of hope, of the endless possibility of the next turn, the next town, the next sunrise. I stood there for a long time, the city lights flickering on around me. Then I got back in my car and I drove home. The road was behind me, but it was also ahead. It always would be, and so I went home. I drove through the quiet streets of my neighborhood, past the familiar houses and the trees my grandfather had planted when I was a boy. I parked in the driveway and sat for a moment, the engine ticking as it cooled. The car was dusted with the grime of 2,000 miles, the floorboards littered with receipts and maps, and the occasional grain of sand from a desert I had left behind. I took a deep breath and stepped out into the cool Chicago night. Inside, the house was dark and still. I did not turn on the lights right away. I stood in the living room, the faint glow of the street lamp casting long shadows across the floor. My grandfather's old chair was still there, the leather cracked and soft. I sat down in it and I closed my eyes. I could hear his voice, the way he used to tell me about the road, about the people he had met, about the places he had seen in his imagination. He had never driven Route 66, but he had traveled it 1,000 times in his mind, and now I had traveled it for both of us. I thought about the Burrows in Oatman, their hooves scraping the pavement as they begged for carrots. I thought about Carol handing me a postcard from a ghost town that was already fading. I thought about Mike, his leather-gloved hands on the wheel of a truck that had crossed the country more times than I could count. I thought about Joseph, his voice shaking as he told me about the dust storms that had buried hope. I thought about Della, her laugh filling the tiny diner like a promise that some things never change. I thought about Emma, her eyes full of dreams she had not yet chased. And I thought about Frank, sitting beside me on a bench in Dwight, telling me that the road was a mirror. The road is a mirror. And when I looked into it, I saw not just the asphalt and the neon and the wide-open sky. I saw my grandfather, young and full of possibility, standing at the edge of a highway he would never take. I saw my own face, younger than it was, eager and afraid. I saw the faces of every traveler I had passed, every stranger who had nodded at a gas pump or waved from a roadside diner. The road holds all of us, our comings and our goings, our stories and our silences. I opened my eyes. The room was still dark, but the street lamp had shifted, casting a soft light on a photograph on the mantel. It was my grandfather, standing in front of a car I did not recognize, a 1950 sedan with fins and chrome. He was smiling, one hand on the door, the other waving at the camera. I had seen that photograph 100 times, but I had never really looked at it. Now I saw the road behind him, a two-lane blacktop disappearing into a curve. He was standing at the start of a journey he never took, but he had taken it through me. I got up and walked to the kitchen. I poured a glass of water and stood at the sink, looking out the window at the quiet street. Somewhere beyond the city lights, the road was still there, winding through the heart of America. It was waiting for the next traveler, the next dreamer, the next person who needed to feel the hum of the tires and the wind on their face. The road would never stop calling. It never does. I went to bed that night and slept deeply without dreams. When I woke, the sun was streaming through the curtains. I lay there for a long time, listening to the sounds of the house, the creak of the floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant murmur of traffic. And I knew that even though I was home, the road was still with me. It was a part of me now, a memory I could carry, a story I could tell. The road that runs through the heart of America runs through all of us. It is the line on the map that connects our past to our future, the thread that binds our stories into a single, endless journey. And whether we drive it or just imagine it, it is always there, waiting, ready to take us somewhere new. That is the promise of the road. That is the gift of the road. And that is the reason we keep moving, keep looking, keep dreaming of the horizon. I got out of bed and walked to the window. The city was awake, the streets filling with cars and people. Somewhere out there, a family was loading up a station wagon. A couple was arguing over a map. A trucker was lighting a cigarette in a cab. They were all part of it, part of the great, pulsing artery of America. And I was part of it too. I had driven the road, and the road had driven me. And I knew, with a certainty that settled into my bones, that I would drive it again. One day, when the time was right, I would get back in my car and head west, toward the setting sun, and start the journey all over again, because the road never ends. It only continues, and so do we.